Welcome to the Theology of Endurance. The following video excerpt has been taken from a keynote address that author Shannon Martin gave during the 2018 Bridge of Hope conference called When the Table Gets Messy. From her book, Falling Free, Rescued from the Life I Always Wanted, Shannon shares how her husband, Corey, took a position as a jail chaplain, and their family moved to a neighborhood that could be considered the other side of the tracks, knowing no one, in Goshen, Indiana. Their family began attending a small church down the street from their home, and they began their own personal ministry of neighboring those they lived closest to. As you listen to Shannon share about Lisa and Bobby, who she first refers to with the alias Mike, you will hear how her family lived into the idea of neighboring for the long haul in what she refers to as a theology of endurance. I encourage you to think about how her story may relate to yours in your neighboring relationship. And at the end of the video, I will leave you with some questions for reflection.
So on one particular Sunday, I looked across, you couldn't miss anybody because there were just a few of us. And I looked across the room and I saw this couple sitting there that I hadn't seen before. And he's covered in tattoos. And so I'm thinking, oh, he's here to see Corey. So I text Corey during church, there's somebody here to see you. And Corey was like, be sure you get their name, find out who they are, let them know where I'm at. And so we had this plan in place. The last hymn of service, this couple bolts. They're trying to sneak out before we can all accost them, which we would have, because that's how we were treated. Felt like celebrities the first time we showed up at this church, because everybody was just so happy and surprised to see somebody new walk in, and we had kids who are really cute. They were wise to try to sneak out early, but I had a job to do. So I bolted after them, and I thought I was going to have to be catching them in the parking lot. They were drinking coffee. We have a little tiny, one of those old school coffee things with the little nozzle. They were in getting coffee, and as I'm walking up to them, the Holy Spirit comes into me in such a way that I suddenly realize I cannot say to them, hey, are you here from jail? All of a sudden I realized that's not the right way to approach this situation. But I'm there in the coffee room with them, and it's just the three of us, and so I say hello. So what, they're friendly but guarded. He has tattoos across his neck. He's just tatted up. And, not quite friendly, but they're talking to me, and so I say, so what brings you over here? And they said, well, I thought they would say, well, we're here to see Chaplain Martin, we're here to see Corey, and they didn't say that. They said, we live in the red house. And I was like, oh, the red house, of course. So I said, okay, we live right one block up from there, we're neighbors, and I tried to be friendly. The following week, they showed up again to church. And what they had told me in that coffee room was basically, we're in the red house. We just decided that we wanted to be around some positive people. And so we came here. And I remember thinking, well, that's not something I hear very often. Quite honestly, it's a big deal. They didn't say anything about jail. They didn't say anything about Corey. Corey came the next week, and they were there again. Corey's like, I've never seen these people before. So again, I'm double glad that I didn't lead with, are you here from jail? And maybe not everybody with tattoos has been in jail, right? These were lessons I've had to learn and was learning. But after church that day, I went over to introduce Corey to them and to just be friendly, to be a neighbor. And I said to them, without planning this at all, I said, would you like to come over for dinner tonight? And I took them very off guard. They were not prepared. And so because I sort of backed them into a corner, they said yes. And we parted ways, and I spent the rest of the afternoon fretting and feeling like there's no way they're going to show up, and we have no way of even reaching them to check to see if they're still coming. I'm making this food. I remember I had done the Sunday nap thing, so I'm in my yoga pants and my hair's crazy. And it was almost time for them to come, and I was really, my self-talk was like, they're not going to show up anyway, Shannon. You're wasting your time. You made all this food. Nobody's going to come and eat it. And I remember thinking, like, it's time now for me to go make myself presentable because I have company coming over. And then I realized, I'm fine. I'm going to show up, you know, when they get here. If they get here, I'm going to be wearing my yoga pants and my ponytail and socks on my feet. We have this new rule in our house that we had learned. Either Corey or myself, one of us, before anybody comes over to our house, one of us puts on our shoes, because we learned the hard way that many people feel very uncomfortable when the expectation is that they take their shoes off. Some people don't have socks. Some people have dirty or holy socks. And it really makes people uncomfortable. We learned that the hard way by accident. We've never had a real stickler rule on that. But what we realized is it just helps if one of us is just wearing shoes. So I'm in my socks, Corey's in his shoes. 5 minutes after, you know, they're supposed to be there, they're not there. And I'm thinking, well, we have a lot of spaghetti to eat. We're going to be eating spaghetti all week. And then we hear a knock at the door. And it was a cold, snowy evening, and I opened the door, and they came in, and she handed me a coconut cream pie from Kroger with the price tag still on. It was $7.99, and it was like a shot through my heart. And she handed me a little glass votive candle, and she said, I hope you like this. I wasn't sure what your colors were. And so we sit down with them at the table. I remember, you know, talking with them, getting to know them. They're warming up a little bit. We're all super uncomfortable. We don't know each other. We don't have a lot in common. They're sharing about their past. They're saying, you know, he just got out of prison. They have a history of addiction. They're trying to rebuild their lives. They're desperate to be sober. They're desperate to have people in their lives who are not also struggling through addiction. At one point in the conversation, you know, it comes up obviously that Corey works at the jail. And Mike at that point slams his hand on the table and says, that's why you look so familiar. So I was like, aha, I was right all along. Corey didn't recognize him, but he recognized Corey. So the story begins to, you know, unravel. We're learning about each other. I'm learning that he has been in a white supremacist gang in prison, which is very, very typical inside prison for everybody to go to their sides and huddle up for protection or for whatever they're doing. And I'm sitting here trying to wrap my brain around what this means. He's now trying to leave the gang, but that's really hard to do. It's very dangerous and risky to do. And I'm sitting there thinking, what does it mean for us to be with him as he tries to leave his gang? Like, what do we do? I mean, I'm having crazy thoughts in my mind. Like, Corey has never been in a fight before. I'm not going to be much help. I know there's violence involved. What can we do? I look over at one point, and Mike has written down his length of his arm, F the police, all the way down. And over here sits my 8-year-old daughter at the time. And I'm questioning all the time I put into developing her as a reader at that point. It's a very surreal moment. And I wrote this whole story in Falling Free in the book, because this was the first time that I had ever invited a stranger into my home. And we weren't brand new into this idea of neighboring, but this was like next level. This was like, I was very aware that they could be dangerous people. I was very aware that we knew nothing about them. I was very aware that our families would freak out if they knew. I was very aware that I had young kids in the room, but I was very aware that I was drawn to these tender-hearted people sitting at my table. I was very honored by the way that they so readily shared their story with me and with Corey and with our family, by the way they invited us into their lives without knowing us. I was very aware that any risk on my part in inviting them over was double for them. I could not believe that they came. Over that next year, they did eventually disappear. Right around the time that we loved them most and felt like things were going better for them and felt like maybe the page was turning for them, they were gone. When they came back, when they boomeranged out and then they boomeranged back in, we were still there. And that's all it was. All it was, the magic of this whole thing was that somehow we were still there, and they knew that we were still there, and they knew that there would always be a place for them at our table. They knew that we were not going to ask about where they had been. It didn't matter. They were willing to tell us. They willingly offered it, but it didn't matter to us. We were just glad that they were back. And so then they disappeared again. Then they were back for a couple of times. Then they both went back to jail. Then they showed back up, and Bobby had like crazy contact lenses in his eyes that made his eyes look like animal eyes. It freaked me out, and he looked very unhealthy. He was very clearly back on meth, very clearly struggling. They disappeared again. I mean, this is what we did for the next year or so. And every time they came back in, or every time they showed up at the jail where Corey now was, we continued our relationship of love and acceptance. And they continued to trust us. They continued to see us as kin with them. What we have learned to see is that success is about our faithfulness. Our success is not tied to a particular outcome, because at the point that we tie our success to a particular outcome, number one, we're inclined to gravitate towards people who are the most likely to give us that outcome. We're inclined to move away from the messiest messes. We're inclined to look at Bobby strung out on meth with animal contact lenses and think, he's not going to be successful for us. When we begin to shift that conversation away from the outcome of the people who we are neighboring, the people who are coming around as neighboring volunteers, the people that we are serving, the people that we are loving, from the lens of, am I being faithful to the work? That changes everything. So a theology of endurance means I've got to still be here. When they keep coming back around, we welcome them with open arms. There is something very powerful about being present to the people around us, to seeing that as the thing that defines our success. To find ways to endure, and that's a whole different conversation. But it's important to sit with the idea of, what does this look like practically? What does it look like to endure for the long haul? So the question is, how messy do we let the table get? What is the limit? There were times I felt with Lisa and Bobby like, I just lost hope. It felt too hard. It felt like a risk. I would always welcome them back, but maybe a little bit of like, I just didn't know. I started to really lament, and in some ways probably be a little depressed about addiction and why God wasn't fixing it. You see these people who are desperate to break free, and they can't, and that's a really hard thing to understand. And then one day, they came back again, and this time it was different. This time, they had both just come back out of jail. Bobby was still in jail at the time. Lisa got out first. She was in the work release center. She started coming back to church. Bobby then got out. And what I can tell you is just a quick snapshot. I wish they were here with me because you would love them. They are fun and amazing, good-hearted people with a lot to teach us. They are brilliant, smart. They're some of our closest friends now. And so what happened was this time was the time. This is their time. This was the time after all the times that so many people around us would have said, cut your losses. They are never getting better. Move on, shake the dust from your feet. But when we love people, that's not so easy. It's not so easy to shake that dust from our feet. And so this was the time, not because of anything we had done, but because of the work God was doing within them. They 1 year ago moved into the first ever jail ministry house. So we started to realize again, over and over and over, we constantly are aware, safe, clean, affordable housing is a humongous issue. Lisa and Bobby had only ever lived in and aspired to live in homes where they heated with the oven, where bugs were everywhere, where the floors were dirt. In my neighborhood, this was all they could have hoped for because they have things in their past that make it impossible for people to want to take a risk on them. And so a little house came up for sale in our neighborhood, and I noticed it on one of those morning walks. And it was right just 1 block from us. It was small, it was affordable, and I called Corey and said, we need to really be thinking in this more long-term direction, because what we know now is that jail ministry, it really begins in earnest once these men and women are out. That is an extremely perilous time for many of them. So Lisa and Bobby moved into that house a year ago. They both started working at a nearby factory. When they wrote up the contract, Bobby said to Corey, one thing I want you to put in the contract, because this is all brand new. We had no template for any of this. We've never been landlords. We don't know what we're doing. And Bobby said, I want you to put in the contract that you will do random drug testing, because I just want that accountability. I want to know that that's on the table. They stayed active in our church. He's actually still on home detention, so he's stuck in that little house for a little while longer. But for whatever reason, this was their time. And I look back and I think about how close I was to missing it. To missing this gleaming moment where things start to click into place, where they believe that they were made for more than this, where God, for whatever reason, eases the burden of their addiction. They're both now the 2 highest level employees at their factory on their shift, with keys to the building. And all the time I've celebrated successes with them, that might have been the biggest one. For them to have keys to a gigantic factory was extremely healing for them. They're making a lot of money, which means that in 3 more months they are paying cash to buy that house from the jail ministry. This was never set up with this in mind, because if you would have told us a year ago, if you would have told us 2 years ago that any of this would have happened, we would have laughed you out of the room. And that's something Corey says all the time. The ones that I think are most sure to do well, they just fall apart. And the ones that I'm like, Bobby is never going to get it together, they just show up and do it. They're about to be homeowners. Lisa right now has her learner's permit. She's working on getting her driver's license back, and they've had to pay thousands of dollars in fines and fees and all this kind of nonsense. But they're working and they have the money to pay for it. And I just had dinner in their home on Sunday night. They're just dear, dear people with such an amazing story to tell. Getting them into a home, that has fundamentally shifted the legacy that they leave. It has fundamentally shifted their family tree. Having a home is such a big deal, and building that sense of responsibility and building that accountability, and I mean, it has changed everything for them. But we would have missed it if we hadn't stuck around for the good part. We're tying ourselves into knots, trying to figure out how to do this, trying to figure out what people need. I think a lot of times they really do just need our consistent presence. They need us to be that one person that says they're going to be there and then is actually there. Who's going to love them through the inevitable ups and downs. I can tell you that if I were to fall into trouble of some kind, I know who I would go to. I know who would receive me without judgment. I know who would point me to the truth. I know who would believe there was more for me. I know this. The people that we are serving serve us.
Here are a few reflection questions to consider on your own or to discuss as a group. How does Shannon's story relate to what you learned in the Strangers to Neighbors training about the spirit of neighboring? You can find more information on the spirit of neighboring in your Neighboring Volunteer Strangers to Neighbors Guide workbook. Shannon says, a theology of endurance means being present to the people around us and encourages us to ask, am I being faithful to the work of being present? What does a theology of endurance look like for you in your neighborhood of support and how you are present for the neighboring family? As a neighboring volunteer, how can you maintain your focus of success on your faithfulness to the work of being present for and not on the outcomes of the family you are neighboring? And finally, what are the ways you, as neighboring volunteers, can support each other through the joys and challenges of neighboring for the long haul, or the theology of endurance?